Wife says he's in hospital with, in quotes, serious mental health issues, as she named him as the presenter at the centre of the allegations. So what questions remain for the BBC and for the Sun newspaper? Sarah Waddington is an expert in PR and crisis communications, former president of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. Hello, Sarah Waddington.
Hi, thanks very much for having me on.
Pleasure. I'm just wondering what you make of all of this, because I guess you could say everyone's very careful with what they're trying to say in their own PR. What have you made of the last 24 hours of each of these people from a PR perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fantastic example of crisis communications being played out very, very publicly. I'd argue that people would have said in the beginning that this was a full-blown crisis for the BBC. My view is actually that now this is a full-blown crisis for the Sun.
Why?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? It's taken a bit of a gamble, which I'd argue hasn't paid off. It had allegations of wrongdoing against an unnamed at the time presenter. These haven't been proven. The police have been involved and have actually reported on that. And of course, now it's trying to regain face, particularly bearing in mind the news that Hugh is now actually in hospital. And of course, we have a duty of care to Hugh, as a key presenter, and to anybody else who may be affected.
Well, the Sun would claim, and, maybe many people listening would say, what about parents? Parents and their views are important, aren't they? And the Sun would say, we're acting because there were concerned parents here.
Yeah, and they say that they engaged with the parents and that they did the due diligence there. But let's not forget, they actually spoke to the person involved, their child. And, I think the person's 20 now. And this person denied any allegations of wrongdoing too before they actually publicised the story, before they went to publish. So I'd argue that there is certainly a motive behind this story. I don't know whether it's to do with Hugh Edwards, but I would suggest it's perhaps politically motivated against the BBC, because let's not forget, Murdoch executives really resent the licence fee. They don't like the BBC's business model, and you could argue that this is a move to destabilise the corporation, or some people are arguing that it's been a distraction from other headlines. As we know, Boris Johnson, our former PM, hasn't handed over his phone.
Yeah, or you could argue this was in the public interest and there were worried parents, and now the BBC are investigating it.
I think it's very difficult to say that it's in the public interest when those allegations were as yet unproven. And that's obviously why they didn't name him.
Sarah, we've got BBC, if you look at the news, we've got BBC Newsnight looking at this. Our own BBC journalists are looking at this.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting, actually, because although the BBC are taking a much more assertive stance, I don't think it helped itself early on when this story first broke. It made the story front and centre of its reporting. My argument is that this should have been relegated to further down the news agenda, particularly while investigations were underway. In my view, it originally looked defensive. And when all it really needed to say was that due process was underway and it was implementing an investigation. It does have a duty of care to its presenters, anybody affected by the situation, and due process absolutely has to be followed in those situations.
Where does this leave the BBC, do you think?
Well, for the BBC, obviously there's further questions. It is doing its own investigation. We have to allow that to happen. My issue is now what happens with the Sun. We know that this could be a huge example of press intrusion. It could end up in a libel action potentially. This would be a really good time to perhaps revisit the recommendations that were made in the Leveson inquiry, which, as you know, was brought into play following the News of the World phone hacking scandal. We do have to be very thoughtful about how this plays out now. It's not that long since presenter Caroline Flack died by suicide following issues that she was having with press intrusion. There is a lot to be said for going back over that ground and looking at how the press is regulated, but also, and very critically, I would argue, for how we give greater legal protection to individuals, because when something is published, let's not forget that social media has democratized things, so anybody can then retweet their own opinion and share that story, and we have to find a way that people do have appropriate protection.
Okay, Sarah Waddington, thank you. Expert in PR and crisis management. It's Drive Time on BBC Radio Scotland and BBC Radio Scotland and BBC Radio Scotland and BBC Radio